Ireland's most haunted places. Ireland is a land of breathtaking beauty, but beneath its rolling hills, misty cliffs and ancient ruins lies a darker side. It's a country steeped in history, where legends and ghostly tales are woven into the fabric of its culture. In this second installment of Ireland's most haunted places, we journey beyond the well-trodden paths to uncover 10 chilling stories from across the island. From spectral monks in forgotten ruins to tragic spirits lingering in cliffside castles, these tales reveal the shadowy corners where history and the supernatural collide. Prepare yourself for ghostly encounters and eerie legends that may leave you questioning the boundary between the living and the dead. The Haunting of Dunmore Caves. Dunmore Caves in County Kilkenny may seem like an ordinary limestone cave system, but its ancient chambers hide a story soaked in fear and tragedy. The Haunting of Dunmore stretches back to the dark days of Viking raids in 928 AD, when Ireland was torn by invaders. As the Vikings descended on Kilkenny, the locals scrambled for safety. A group of villagers, men, women and children, fled to Dunmore Caves, hoping the deep, twisting passages would hide them from the marauders. But their sanctuary soon became a death trap. The Vikings found the hiding place, and rather than risk a fight in the narrow cave, they decided on a cruel tactic. Blocking the entrance with boulders, they sealed the villagers inside, dooming them to darkness. Trapped without food or light, the villagers perished in those black caverns, their final moments filled with terror and despair. According to local lore, their spirits have never left, and the cries of the dying still echo in the depths of Dunmore. Centuries later, stories of strange occurrences began circulating among those brave enough to explore the caves. Visitors report an oppressive atmosphere that worsens the deeper one ventures, as though something unseen is watching. Some guides say they've heard faint whispering in the quieter chambers, a sound that grows louder, almost desperate, as if the voices are calling for help. In certain areas, the air turns biting cold, and shadows seem to move just beyond the beam of a flashlight. One chilling encounter happened to a historian named Liam O'Shea, who came to Dunmore Caves to research folklore. Determined to capture the essence of the tales, he arranged to visit alone, accompanied only by a flashlight and a recording device. The evening was calm as he descended into the cave, the weight of centuries-old silence pressing in around him. As he ventured further, he noticed a low, almost inaudible murmur. It was faint at first, like a breeze passing through the narrow crevices. But soon it grew louder, becoming more distinct. A panicked, whispered conversation, though he couldn't understand the words. Heart pounding, Liam switched on his recorder, hoping to capture evidence of what he was hearing. But as he continued, a sudden chill crept over him, and he felt as though eyes were watching from the shadows. He stopped, his flashlight flickering, casting eerie shadows along the stone walls. A sense of dread washed over him as he turned to look back. The whispers were closer now, and he could make out fragments of desperate pleas. Then, without warning, a scream shattered the stillness. It wasn't just a sound, it was a piercing wail that seemed to rise from the very walls, filling the chamber with a cry of anguish. Liam staggered back, tripping over loose stones, his flashlight skittering across the ground. In the brief flashes of light, he thought he saw ghostly faces, twisted in fear, flickering in and out of sight. He bolted for the entrance, heart racing, leaving his recording equipment behind. Once outside, he collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. When he later returned to retrieve his belongings, he found the recording device broken, as if something had deliberately tampered with it. He never entered Dunmore Caves again. To this day, locals warn visitors against exploring the caves at night. Some believe that the spirits within grow restless after sundown, their anguish intensifying as they relive their final moments. Those who live nearby claim that on certain nights, the sound of faint cries drifts from the cave, carried by the wind. Dunmore Caves remains a site of fascination and fear, its dark chambers a monument to the tragedy that unfolded within. For those who believe, it is a place haunted by sorrow, where spirits cling to the last shreds of their lives. And for those who don't, it is a chilling reminder that some places hold memories that refuse to be forgotten. The Cursed Ruins of Loftus Hall. On the windswept coast of County Wexford, the imposing Loftus Hall has long been known as Ireland's most haunted house. The hall itself is notorious for its legends, but it is the ruins of the original Loftus family residence, hidden behind the main mansion, where the real terror is said to reside. Dating back to the 14th century, the original manor was abandoned after a series of mysterious tragedies struck the Loftus family, giving rise to tales of a dark curse on the estate. The most enduring legend from the old Loftus residence began with an unusual storm one October night. According to the story, the young Lady Anne Tottenham and her family were hosting guests when a shipwrecked stranger arrived at their doorstep. Tall and handsome, he seemed to charm everyone, especially Lady Anne, who quickly fell under his spell. But some family members sensed something unsettling about him, noticing how his eyes gleamed with an unnatural light and how he moved with a silent, ghostly grace. One evening, as the group played a game of cards, Lady Anne bent down to retrieve a dropped card and saw, to her horror, that the stranger's feet were not human. They were cloven, like those of a demon. She screamed, and the stranger stood, towering over her with a fierce, twisted smile, before disappearing into a puff of smoke. Lady Anne's family tried to console her, but she had been changed by the experience. She grew pale and withdrawn, eventually becoming consumed by madness. Despite her family's attempts to help, she locked herself in her room and refused to eat, spending her final days in silence, staring out the window as if waiting for the stranger to return. Since then, locals have avoided the ruins of the original Loftus residence, convinced that Lady Anne's spirit roams the property. In recent years, paranormal investigators have visited the ruins, hoping to capture evidence of her ghost. They report eerie sounds, cold drafts, and the feeling of being watched. One investigator, upon entering Lady Anne's former room, felt a wave of nausea and unease that intensified as he stood there. He later described the experience as feeling like someone was screaming inside my head. Locals claim that on stormy nights, Lady Anne's spirit can still be seen in the ruined hall, moving from window to window, searching for something, or someone, that was lost to her long ago. They say the old manor is cursed, warning that anyone who disturbs Lady Anne's ghost will bring misfortune upon themselves. The ruins are slowly being reclaimed by nature, their walls crumbling and overgrown with ivy, but the air around them remains thick with sorrow and a lingering sense of dread. For those who dare to visit Loftus Hall's original ruins, there is a palpable sense of unease that makes even the bravest pause. The shadows seem to lengthen, the air grows cold, and the slightest sound echoes like footsteps in the stillness. Some who have ventured there report hearing the faint rustle of skirts and feeling an icy hand on their shoulder. Even the local animals avoid the area, shying away from the ruins as if sensing a danger invisible to human eyes. A few years ago, a group of teenagers, skeptical of the ghost stories, decided to spend the night near the ruins. As midnight approached, they began to hear faint whispering, growing louder with each passing moment. One of them, a young man named Ian, laughed it off and called out to the supposed ghost. Moments later, he felt a chill pass through him, followed by a sharp pain in his chest, as if he had been struck by an unseen hand. Shaken, he staggered back to his friends, who watched in horror as his face turned pale. The whispering continued, louder and more urgent, until the group could stand it no longer and fled. Since that night, Ian has suffered from recurring nightmares of Lady Anne's face, her eyes hollow and mournful, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. He claims that every time he tries to sleep, he feels the same cold touch on his shoulder, as if the ghost followed him from the ruins. Despite his best efforts, he can't shake the feeling that Lady Anne's spirit is still searching for the stranger who cursed her to an eternity of despair. The ruins of the old Loftus Hall remain, weathered and broken, a silent witness to the tragic tale of Lady Anne and the stranger who visited that fateful night. For those who believe, the place is haunted by a woman's unending sorrow. For skeptics, it is a decaying structure, empty of all but memories. But one thing is certain, the story of Lady Anne lives on, her presence felt by all who wander too close to the ruins, where the past lingers in shadow, waiting to touch those who dare to enter. The Phantom Monks of Abbeylara. In County Longford, the ruins of Abbeylara Monastery stand silent and overgrown, a shadow of the grand monastery that once thrived there. The abbey was established in the 13th century by Cistercian monks who lived in quiet devotion to their faith. But after the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, Abbeyara's peaceful halls were emptied, and its inhabitants were forced to abandon it. However, some monks never left, their spirits said to haunt the crumbling remains, clinging to the only home they knew. The abbey sits on a remote patch of land, accessible only by narrow dirt paths winding through thick, ancient woods. Visitors describe an eerie silence that hangs over the place, as if the birds and creatures of the forest avoid it. Those who venture into the ruins speak of a coldness that defies the season and shadows that seem to flicker in the corners of their vision. Many have reported seeing hooded figures gliding silently through the stone hallways at dusk, their robes tattered and indistinct. One of the most famous tales comes from an amateur historian who visited Abbeylara in the early 1900s. Fascinated by tales of monastic life, he decided to spend the night in the abbey's old chapel, hoping to experience the serenity the monks had once found there. Around midnight, he began to hear faint chanting echoing through the empty stone halls. The sound grew louder, filling the air with the low, reverent voices of monks. But when he looked around, the chapel was empty. He later described the sensation as both terrifying and calming, as if the spirits meant him no harm but were simply continuing their devotions as they had for centuries. But as the chanting continued, he began to feel an icy pressure on his shoulders, as though invisible hands were trying to push him to his knees. Overwhelmed, he fled the abbey and swore never to return. Locals warn against visiting Abbeylara alone or at dusk. They claim that those who disrespect the place will find themselves marked by the spirits. A cold touch on the shoulder, a whisper in their ear, or, in rare cases, a sudden illness that leaves them bedridden for days. Those who have spent time near the abbey often speak of strange dreams in which they see robed figures, their faces obscured, chanting in a language that is at once familiar and entirely foreign. The ruin itself is weathered and crumbling, its walls overtaken by ivy and moss, but the atmosphere remains charged with a sense of something otherworldly. Paranormal investigators who have visited Abbeylara report strange temperature drops, equipment malfunctions, and, in one instance, a photograph that showed a row of monks standing in the shadows, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Abbeylara Monastery is not a place for the faint of heart. For believers, it is a site where the past remains vividly present, a place where the spirits of the monks linger, their lives devoted to a faith that has not allowed them rest. For skeptics, it is a beautiful ruin, impressive in its solitude. But for anyone who visits, Abbeylara is unforgettable, a reminder of lives lived long ago and a testament to the power of faith, both in life and beyond. The Wailing Bog of Ballyduff. In the remote boglands of County Waterford, just outside Ballyduff, lies an area shrouded in mystery and fear. Known simply as the Wailing Bog, this stretch of land has a chilling reputation. Over centuries, the bog has yielded numerous bodies preserved in the Piat, believed by archaeologists to be remnants of ancient ritual sacrifices. Locals, however, believe these preserved bodies belong to restless souls who haunt the area, their cries sometimes heard echoing across the empty landscape. The bog itself is vast, stretching out in all directions with only scrubby vegetation and the occasional tree breaking the monotony. The ground is damp and spongy, and the mist that clings to the area makes it feel as though one is stepping into another world. Local farmers and fishermen avoid the bog at night, warning that it is a place where the past seeps up from the ground. They tell tales of figures that appear in the mist, figures with gaunt, weathered faces and clothes rotted and stained by centuries in the earth. One of the bog's most unsettling stories is that of a shepherd named Eamon O'Leary, who passed by the bog every day while tending to his sheep. One evening, as he guided his flock home, a thick fog rolled in, enveloping the area in an impenetrable grey. Eamon lost his way, wandering deeper into the bog than he ever intended. He recalled hearing a faint, mournful wail, a sound so low and sad that it seemed to resonate from the ground itself. As he tried to find his way out, the wailing grew louder, and he began to feel a sinking sensation underfoot. Glancing down, he saw that the ground was swallowing his boots, as if trying to drag him deeper into the bog. Suddenly, he saw them, pale figures moving through the mist, their faces hidden in shadow. They reached out to him, their hands skeletal and dripping with peat. With a cry, Eamon broke free and stumbled back to solid ground, leaving his boots behind. For weeks after, he was plagued by nightmares of hands reaching up from the earth. Visitors to the Wailing Bog report similar eerie experiences. Many claim to hear disembodied voices calling to them, often just as they are about to leave. These voices are faint, yet unmistakable, a chorus of whispers that seem to beg for release. Some people speak of feeling a sudden drop in temperature, even on warm days, and an overwhelming urge to turn back, as if the bog itself is warning them away. In recent years, a group of researchers arrived to study the bog bodies discovered in the area, hoping to uncover more about the people who lived and died there thousands of years ago. One evening, after a long day of excavating, one of the researchers, a woman named Claire, decided to take a solitary walk through the bog. As she wandered, she felt an odd prickling sensation on the back of her neck, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over her. Suddenly, the air grew heavy, and a distant wail reached her ears. Claire stood frozen, feeling as though she was being watched. The wailing grew louder, more desperate, and she noticed dark shapes forming in the mist. Panic seized her, and she turned to run, her feet slipping on the damp ground. Just as she reached the edge of the bog, she felt something cold graze her ankle, a sensation that lingered long after she returned to camp. That night, Claire could not sleep, haunted by the memory of the touch. When she returned to the site the next morning, she found a shallow footprint in the mud, a footprint that was not her own. She took a photograph of the print, but to her horror, the image showed not one footprint, but several, as though a group had been following her. The locals believe the spirits of the bog are ancient, their souls trapped in the peat, bound by whatever tragic fate befell them thousands of years ago. The discovery of bodies preserved for millennia only adds to the sense of the supernatural that pervades the place. While scientists may seek answers, the people of Ballyduff accept the bog's mysteries as part of their heritage, a haunting reminder of a past both distant and disturbingly close. The Wailing Bog remains one of Ireland's lesser-known yet most chilling sights. It is a place where history merges with horror, where the dead are not silent, and where those who listen too closely may find themselves hearing the call of ancient voices that echo across time. The Phantom Piper of Dunluce Castle. Perched dramatically on the cliffs of County Antrim, Dunluce Castle stands as one of Northern Ireland's most iconic ruins. Though the castle's stone walls have weathered the centuries, they carry tales of ghostly encounters and tragic mysteries. Among these legends is the story of the Phantom Piper, a spectral musician whose eerie tunes are said to echo through the castle ruins at dusk, heard by those who dare to linger. The story begins in the early 17th century, when a young piper from a local village was hired to perform for the Lord and Lady of Dunluce. He was known for his talent, able to make the pipes sing with melodies that brought listeners to tears. The evening began like any other. Guests dined and danced while the piper filled the castle's grand hall with music. But as night deepened, a fierce storm rolled in from the sea, battering the castle's cliffs with ferocious waves. The guests were ushered to safety, and the piper, left alone in the hall, began to play a haunting tune. According to witnesses, the music grew louder, filling every corner of the castle, even drowning out the howling wind. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the music stopped. When the servants returned, the piper had vanished, leaving only his pipes behind. It was as though he had been spirited away by the storm itself. Since that night, visitors to Dunluce Castle claim to hear the faint sound of pipes drifting through the air as dusk falls. The tune is melancholy, filled with a sorrow that tugs at the heart. Locals believe that the piper's spirit is trapped within the castle, cursed to play his mournful music for eternity. One chilling account comes from a family who visited Dunluce on a grey, foggy day. As they explored the ruins, the youngest child paused and said she could hear the sad man's song. Her parents dismissed it as imagination, but the child insisted. "He's playing for us," she whispered, pointing to an empty corner of the hall where the sound was strongest. When the family listened closely, they heard it too, a faint, mournful melody that faded as they moved closer. Another eerie incident involved a group of college students on a ghost tour. As they entered the castle, one of them joked about meeting the piper. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a gust of cold air swept through the hall, and the sound of pipes began to fill the space around them. The group watched in stunned silence as the music grew louder, then suddenly stopped, leaving an unnerving stillness in its wake. They left quickly, each with a lingering feeling that they had disturbed something ancient and restless. Even in daylight, the ruin of Dunluce Castle holds an atmosphere thick with mystery. Its walls are crumbling, its rooms open to the sky, but the air within remains heavy, as though filled with memories of lives long gone. The locals speak of the Phantom Piper with a mixture of respect and fear, warning that those who seek him may find more than they bargained for. Dunluce Castle is a testament to Northern Ireland's haunted past, a place where history and legend merge into a ghostly echo that refuses to be silenced. For those who listen closely, the Phantom Piper's tune is still there, floating on the wind, a reminder that some spirits never find rest. The Lady of Belvelly Castle. Belvelly Castle, located on Great Island in Cork Harbour, stands as a sombre reminder of Ireland's medieval history. This imposing, ivy-clad fortress was once home to Lady Margaret Hodnett, whose spirit is said to haunt its stone walls to this day. Known in legend as the Lady of Belvelly, her tragic tale has woven itself into the very stones of the castle. Lady Margaret was reputedly one of the most beautiful women in the land, but her beauty was matched only by her pride. She entertained numerous suitors, but none more persistent than Clondacorcy, a young nobleman from a nearby estate. Though he adored her, she spurned his advances, holding out for a suitor of higher status. Enraged by her rejection, Clondacorcy swore vengeance and laid siege to Belvelly Castle, determined to make Lady Margaret pay for her scorn. The siege dragged on, and the inhabitants of the castle began to starve. Lady Margaret, her beauty fading with each passing day, gazed at herself in a small hand mirror, horrified by her changing appearance. Desperation and despair set in, and after months of hardship, the castle finally surrendered. Clondacorcy stormed the walls and took possession of Belvelly, only to find that Lady Margaret's beauty had withered away, her pride broken. Heartbroken, she withdrew into isolation, refusing to see anyone and retreating into her memories. She is said to have died soon after, clutching her mirror. Locals believe that her spirit remains within the castle, eternally trapped by her vanity and regret. Visitors to Belvelly Castle report eerie sightings of a pale woman dressed in tattered finery, gazing into a mirror that seems to appear and disappear. Those who approach her often hear a whisper, repeating the same phrase, "Beauty fades." Some have claimed to see the mirror itself hanging on the wall, only to vanish the moment they try to touch it. The most unnerving encounter came from a group of tourists who visited Belvelly Castle on a misty autumn afternoon. As they walked through the ruins, one woman noticed a figure standing by a window. She looked closer and saw a pale, gaunt face staring back at her, eyes hollow with sorrow. Startled, she turned to call her friends, but when she looked back, the figure was gone. Belvelly Castle remains a haunting reminder of the perils of pride and vanity. For those who believe Lady Margaret's spirit lingers, forever watching her reflection in a mirror that may only exist in her mind, and for those who don't, the castle's eerie silence and shadowed halls are unsettling enough to make anyone question what lies beyond. The Whispering Walls of Shane's Castle. Shane's Castle in County Antrim, Northern Ireland, is an imposing ruin that sits on the banks of Lough Neagh. Built by the powerful O'Neill family in the 14th century, the castle was once a grand residence known for its lavish interiors and opulent gardens, but its story is one of misfortune, tragedy, and a family curse that haunts the O'Neills to this day. According to legend, Shane's Castle is cursed by a banshee, a wailing spirit who forewarns the family of impending death. The O'Neill banshee has haunted the family for generations, her mournful cries said to echo through the castle whenever tragedy strikes. In the early 1800s, the O'Neills experienced the banshee's curse in a devastating way. On a stormy night in 1816, the castle caught fire, and the flames quickly engulfed much of the structure. Although the family narrowly escaped, the castle was left in ruins, its walls blackened and broken. Since that fateful night, Shane's Castle has lain empty, its grand halls and corridors now silent witnesses to the past. But those who visit claim the castle is far from empty. Many report hearing whispers echoing through the stone walls, as if the spirits within are carrying on conversations long forgotten by the living. The whispers are most often heard in the castle's dungeons and corridors, where the shadows seem to deepen, creating an atmosphere thick with dread. One chilling encounter was reported by a couple who visited the ruins during a winter evening. As they wandered through the shadowed corridors, the woman suddenly felt a chill sweep over her, and she heard her own name whispered in her ear. Shocked, she turned, expecting to see someone standing beside her, but the corridor was empty. Her partner, sensing her fear, urged her to leave, but she felt drawn to the whispers, as if something within the castle walls was calling her back. In another instance, a paranormal investigation team set up equipment in the dungeon, hoping to capture evidence of the castle's hauntings. As they worked, one investigator wandered deeper into the shadows, drawn by the faint sound of a woman sobbing. The sobbing grew louder, filling the small chamber with an overwhelming sorrow, yet no one else in the group could hear it. The investigator tried to reach out, speaking softly, hoping to make contact, but the sobbing stopped as suddenly as it had started. When he returned to the group, they noticed a strange scratch on his arm that hadn't been there before, as though he had been marked by an unseen force. Another tale passed down by locals tells of a night watchman who was assigned to patrol the ruins. Known for his skepticism, he laughed at the ghost stories, scoffing at the idea of a banshee or whispering walls. But one night, as he walked through the empty halls, he felt an inexplicable sense of dread. He heard faint, indistinct whispers coming from the shadows, growing louder with each step. His bravado fading, he began to walk faster, but the whispers followed him, echoing his footsteps until he broke into a run. That night, he quit his job, refusing to return to the castle. Locals believe that Shane's castle is haunted not only by the banshee, but by the spirits of those who once lived, worked, and died within its walls. The whispers are thought to be the voices of long-departed souls, perhaps retainers of the O'Neill family, servants who perished in the fire, or even prisoners held in the castle's dungeons centuries ago. For believers, these ghostly murmurs are echoes of the past, a reminder of the lives and tragedies that played out within the castle's walls. For skeptics, Shane's castle is simply an eerie ruin, its dark halls and heavy silence fueling stories that blur the line between reality and myth. Even in daylight, the atmosphere at Shane's castle is unmistakably eerie. The once grand towers stand like silent sentinels, their stones worn and weathered, yet still bearing the weight of a family's dark legacy. The shadowed corridors and empty rooms exude a feeling of watchful stillness, as though the walls themselves are listening, waiting for those who dare to tread upon the past. Shane's castle remains one of Northern Ireland's most mysterious and haunted sites. For those who visit, it is a place where history, legend, and the supernatural collide, a haunting reminder of lives touched by misfortune and of a curse that refuses to fade with time. The Headless Horseman of Killakee House. Nestled in the foothills of the Dublin Mountains, Killakee House has a long history of supernatural encounters. Built in the 18th century as a hunting lodge for the infamous Massey family, the house has since fallen into ruin, its grandeur lost to time and decay. But while the structure may have crumbled, something darker has taken up residence within its walls. Known for strange apparitions, unexplained noises, and ghostly presences, Killakee House has earned a reputation as one of Ireland's most haunted locations. One of the most famous spirits associated with Killakee House is that of the Headless Horseman, a spectral figure said to gallop through the surrounding fields and along the paths leading to the house. According to local lore, this headless apparition is the spirit of a former coachman who worked for the Massey family. The story goes that one night, the coachman took a dangerous shortcut down the mountainside during a storm, his coach speeding down the narrow paths. Tragically, the coach overturned, killing him instantly. Now he is believed to haunt the area, forever reliving his final doomed ride. Visitors to Killakee House often report hearing the thunderous sound of hooves echoing through the night. Some claim to see a dark figure on horseback, headless and riding at breakneck speed along the tree-lined paths. One evening, a group of hikers camping nearby was startled by what sounded like horses charging toward them. They emerged from their tents to see a spectral figure speeding past, disappearing into the mist, leaving an icy chill in its wake. The house itself has a sinister reputation, and those who have explored its ruined rooms report unsettling experiences. Many describe hearing whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty halls, as though someone unseen is watching them. Paranormal investigators who have visited the site recorded strange sounds, from low groans to eerie, high-pitched wails that seem to come from the very walls. One investigator, venturing alone into the basement, felt a sudden drop in temperature and saw a shadowy figure flicker at the edge of his vision, only to vanish when he looked directly at it. In the 1960s, Killakee House was briefly owned by Margaret O'Brien, who converted it into an art gallery. During renovations, her workmen reported a series of strange encounters, including the sighting of a large black cat with glowing eyes. This spectral feline appeared out of nowhere, moving silently through the rooms, its eyes fixed intently on anyone it encountered. The men claimed they could feel a malevolent presence whenever the cat was near, as if it were a guardian spirit, protecting something hidden within the house. They even brought in a priest to bless the property, hoping to banish the entity, but the cat reappeared several times after, undeterred. One of the most chilling stories associated with Killakee House happened to a local photographer who visited the property on Halloween night to capture images of the reputed hauntings. As he set up his equipment, he heard a faint galloping sound, growing louder with each passing moment. Looking up, he saw a misty figure on horseback, headless and cloaked in darkness, charging straight toward him. Frozen in terror, he could only watch as the horse and rider passed by, vanishing into the shadows. When he later developed his photographs, he was shocked to find a faint outline of the figure in one of the images, its form barely visible but unmistakable. Killakee House remains a popular destination for ghost hunters, though few dare to venture there after dark. The spirit of the Headless horseman, along with the eerie black cat, continue to frighten those who come too close. Locals advise staying away from the house, warning that the spirits within are not friendly and that those who disturb them risk bringing a curse upon themselves. Today, Killakee House stands as a ruin, its stone walls slowly crumbling under the weight of time. The house's haunted history, however, shows no signs of fading. For believers, it is a place where the past and the supernatural intertwine, a haunted landmark in a landscape rich with mystery. For skeptics, it's a curious oddity, a ruin with stories that fuel the imagination. But for those who have encountered the Headless horseman, the ghostly black cat, or the cold whispers in Killakee's halls, there is no question. Something sinister lingers in the shadows, watching and waiting for those who dare to intrude. The ghostly Green Lady of Springhill House. Tucked away in the rolling countryside of County Londonderry, Northern Ireland, stands Springhill House, a picturesque estate with a dark and sorrowful past. Built in the 17th century, this grand manor once served as the family home for the influential Lennox Conyngham family. Though its elegant Georgian architecture and manicured gardens paint a charming picture, visitors to Springhill House often leave with stories of eerie encounters and inexplicable chills. The most famous ghost of Springhill House is known as the Green Lady, believed to be the spirit of Olivia Lennox Conyngham. According to legend, Olivia was married to George Lennox Conyngham, a man she adored deeply. However, George struggled with severe depression, and one fateful night he took his own life. Olivia, heartbroken and unable to cope with the tragedy, became withdrawn and melancholy, spending the rest of her life in mourning. Today, her ghost is said to wander the halls, dressed in her distinctive green gown, her expression filled with sorrow and regret. Visitors to Springhill often report seeing Olivia's ghostly figure moving gracefully through the corridors and rooms of the house. Some describe a cold, heavy presence settling over them as they step into certain rooms, as though the very air remembers the heartbreak and despair that lingered there. Guides recount numerous stories of visitors feeling an icy touch on their shoulder or hearing faint sobbing echoing through the halls, particularly in the bedroom where Olivia spent her final days. One particularly unnerving encounter was experienced by a couple visiting Springhill House on a quiet afternoon. As they wandered through the rooms, they both felt an overwhelming sadness, a sensation that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. In one of the bedrooms, the wife noticed a woman dressed in green, standing by the window, gazing into the distance with an expression of deep sorrow. The couple assumed she was part of a historical reenactment and admired her costume. But as they approached, the figure faded into thin air, leaving them shocked and unable to explain what they had just seen. Another haunting account comes from a night guard, assigned to keep watch over the estate during a renovation period in the 1970s. One evening, as he made his rounds, he heard the soft sound of footsteps following him. Turning, he saw the faint outline of a woman in green drifting down the hallway. The figure moved silently, her feet barely touching the ground, her face obscured by shadow. The guard later reported feeling an intense chill and a sense of sadness that stayed with him for days afterward. Springhill House's employees have grown accustomed to Olivia's ghostly presence, with some even feeling comforted by her. One longtime caretaker described hearing soft whispers and feeling as though someone was watching over her as she went about her daily tasks. She spoke of the Green Lady as if she were an old friend, a quiet companion who had simply never left her family home. Paranormal investigators who have visited Springhill House claim to have captured recordings of faint voices and footsteps in empty rooms, along with cold spots that seem to move as though a spirit is passing by. In one session, a researcher using a thermal camera saw an unexplained heat signature in the shape of a figure standing by the window where Olivia reportedly appears. When they tried to interact, the figure vanished, leaving the room ice cold in its wake. Today, Springhill House remains open to the public as a museum, where visitors can explore its rooms and gardens, learning about the history of the Lennox-Conyngham family. But for those who know the tales of Olivia's sorrow, it's impossible to wander the halls without feeling the weight of her presence. The Green Lady's spirit, they say, is bound to the house, her love and loss woven into its walls. Whether she's searching for her lost husband or simply reliving her happiest memories, her presence is a poignant reminder of love that defied death. For skeptics, Springhill House may just be a beautiful historical site, rich with stories from the past. But for those who have encountered Olivia, seen the flash of a green dress in the corner of their vision, or felt the gentle touch of a spectral hand, there is no doubt that the Green Lady is real. She remains in her family home, a spectral guardian who walks the line between the living and the dead, her sorrow echoing through the halls of Springhill House. The Witch of Ballygally Head. Perched on the rugged coast of County Cork, Ballygally Head is known for its dramatic cliffs and sweeping views of the Atlantic Ocean. Yet, the locals whisper of a darker legacy hidden among its craggy stones and salty winds. Beneath the beauty lies a haunting tale of a young woman who met a tragic fate, her spirit said to roam the cliffs, forever bound by a curse of vengeance. The story begins in the early 1700s, when a woman named Mairead O'Sullivan arrived in Ballygally. Known as a healer, Mairead used her knowledge of herbs and potions to cure ailments and help those in need. But as her reputation grew, so did the rumours. Whispers began to circulate that Mairead was not simply a healer, but a witch. Accusations flew, spurred by fear and jealousy, and soon the townsfolk began to turn against her. When a series of misfortunes struck the village, a failed harvest, a sickness that swept through the livestock, Mairead was blamed. Her fate was sealed. One stormy night, the villagers dragged her to the cliffs of Ballygally Head. Despite her pleas of innocence, they forced her over the edge, watching as she fell into the churning sea below. Legend says that as Mairead was swept away by the waves, she cursed the village and its people, vowing that her spirit would haunt them until justice was served. Since that night, the cliffs of Ballygally have become a site of supernatural activity. Locals say that on certain nights, the spirit of Mairead appears, her ghostly figure standing on the edge of the cliff, her eyes filled with a sorrowful rage. Those who have dared to approach claim to hear her voice carried on the wind, a chilling whisper that grows louder as they draw near. Come closer, see what you have done. One of the most terrifying encounters came from a fisherman named Sean, who claimed to have seen Mairead's ghost one misty morning. As he cast his nets, he noticed a figure standing alone on the cliff's edge. He called out, but she didn't respond. Then, without warning, she turned to face him, her pale face twisted with sorrow, her mouth moving in silent accusation. Frightened, he turned away, but when he glanced back, she was gone, leaving only a chill in the air and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. Visitors to Ballygally Head have also reported strange occurrences. Hikers often feel an intense sense of unease as they approach the cliff, as if being watched by unseen eyes. Some hear faint laughter on the breeze, a haunting sound that seems to come from nowhere. Others have felt cold hands brush against their arms, only to turn and find themselves alone. One visitor, a woman named Nora, recounted an experience that left her shaken. As she stood on the cliff, she felt an overwhelming urge to step closer to the edge, a compulsion she couldn't explain. She felt as though someone was guiding her, whispering in her ear, drawing her forward. Just as she reached the very edge, a voice shouted her name, snapping her out of the trance. She stumbled back, gasping, and saw the faint outline of a woman in a long dress disappearing into the mist. Despite the terrifying tales, paranormal investigators continue to visit Ballygally Head, hoping to capture evidence of Mairead's ghost. Some have recorded strange audio phenomena, whispering voices, laughter, and the faint sound of footsteps on the gravel paths. Others have experienced sudden temperature drops and unexplained equipment malfunctions near the cliff's edge. One investigator, using a thermal camera, reported capturing a heat signature in the shape of a woman standing at the cliff's edge, even though no one was there. Locals believe that Mairead's spirit remains bound to Ballygally Head, her curse lingering like a shadow over the village. Some even say that the misfortunes she predicted still haunt the town, with mysterious illnesses and accidents plaguing those who dare to disrespect her memory. The cliffs themselves, beautiful yet treacherous, serve as a reminder of the past, a place where justice was denied and a life was taken in fear and ignorance. Ballygally Head remains a haunting and tragic sight, a place where legend and landscape intertwine. For believers, it is a reminder of the dangers of fear and superstition, a place where a spirit lingers, waiting for the justice she was denied. For skeptics, it is simply another rugged corner of Ireland, steeped in history and mystery. But for those who visit, the sense of something unseen is unmistakable, a chilling presence that watches from the shadows, waiting for those who dare to come closer. Ireland's haunted places remind us that the past is never truly gone. It lingers, sometimes in ways we can't explain. Each story, each ghost, carries a piece of history, echoing the joys, sorrows, and mysteries of lives long past. Whether you're a believer in the paranormal or a skeptic drawn to the thrill of a good story, these places invite us to explore the unknown and confront the shadows of Ireland's history. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the supernatural. Until next time, tread carefully. You never know what might be waiting in the dark.